This is Dr. Rob Harder with the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast, Making Your World Better. What does it take to be an effective nonprofit leader today? What are the biggest challenges? What are the biggest obstacles? How should nonprofits fundraise in an economy that is constantly changing? All of these reasons combined led me to start this show. And it's my hope that through this series, people can learn not only what it takes to be an effective nonprofit organization, but to hear from effective leaders who are successfully making a positive impact in their communities. We hope you enjoy the show, as together we hear how they are making their world better. Well, welcome to the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. Wherever you are listening, thanks for tuning in today. It's so fun to continue to see this community grow, really, and have more of you listening and tuning in. Thanks for making this show continue to get out to more people. So today, food insecurity, this is a huge issue, right? And it's not just because it's post-COVID. Food insecurity has been a real issue in our country for years and years and years, right? And even me, the organization I formerly led, that was one of our primary missions, was to deal with the issue of hunger and food insecurity. And in the area we lived in, it was a big issue. And most people were surprised that it was such an issue. And so the guest I have on today will talk all about her work in Massachusetts and how not only she's just doing a wonderful job in their region of Massachusetts, but then she's put together this coalition to really address statewide this issue of food insecurity. So I think you're going to really enjoy hearing about how she's gone about this process. Again, my guest is Erin McAleer. She's the president and CEO of Project Bread, again, based out of Massachusetts. And we'll talk a bunch about how she scaled the organization. And I think you're going to really enjoy what Erin has to say. And one of those things I thought was very insightful was that she said, you should never make scaling your goal. Your goal is to be really clear on your mission and get really good at accomplishing that mission. And then the result will be of a healthy culture and a healthy mission is scaling your organization. And I just really liked her approach. So we'll talk about that. She'll also talk quite a bit about advocacy. She's put together this coalition, as I mentioned, where it's something that's statewide and really makes a big impact on the entire state, not just the region and a particular community that she's started in. So all this will make for a really good conversation. I love talking to people that are doing very innovative and very powerful, impactful programs all across this country. So as always, thanks for tuning in. Now on to the show. This podcast is sponsored by DonorBox. DonorBox, helping you help others with the best donation forms in the business. Erin, thanks so much for being on the show today. I thought it'd be good to start with talking about Project Bread's work and specifically Project Bread's advocacy work that has led to this permanent passage of free school meals for all K-12 students in Massachusetts. Could you start with that?
Yeah, so Project Bread, just backing up, we're a food security organization in Massachusetts. We serve the whole state, and we say that we have a radical approach to ending hunger. And what we really mean by that radical approach is that there's so much focus in our country on alleviation of hunger, and certainly that work is so incredibly important. Right now, 1 in 5 families with kids are food insecure in Massachusetts, so we need to meet that immediate need. But we feel very strongly that hunger is preventable and solvable. So what we focus on is permanent systems change to make sure that nobody in Massachusetts, which is, one of the wealthiest states and the wealthiest country in the world, goes without that basic need of food. And so when we've looked at what are the strategies that are necessary, years ago, even before COVID, our team talked about universal free school meals. We felt if every kid in Massachusetts could get free breakfast and free lunch, that alone would prevent childhood hunger here in our state. Over half your daily calories from a low-income kid can come from school meals, and making sure that we broke down the 2 barriers to school meals, which were both cost and stigma. That was always kind of a pipe dream, to be honest. It seemed like a very unrealistic goal, even though as an organization we felt strongly. But then the pandemic came, and every school in the United States of America was offering free school meals. And we saw all the data and the stories to demonstrate the effectiveness of this policy. And so when it ended on the federal level, we brought together an awesome coalition called the Feed Kids Coalition to say that Massachusetts needed to make it permanent here in our state. And as you said, key to this effort has really been people with lived experience. This was personal for me. I grew up food insecure here in Massachusetts. And one of my mom's biggest stresses was how she was going to pay for school meals. And I remember that as a child. And, that was 35 years ago that we were going through that. and the system hadn't changed. It was still incredibly broken. And so there were folks coming towards today saying, hey, I'm still facing this. So we had students who were advocating for it, who experienced food insecurity, students who didn't, but saw the stigma in the cafeteria and recognized that this policy would eliminate it. Parents spoke out on it. And what we heard from legislators is actually they heard more on this issue than any other issue last session.
Wow. Well, thanks for sharing a little bit of your personal story first. And then I know that you've got this council of experts with lived experience that really seeks to engage individuals who have experienced this food insecurity themselves personally, and then they can contribute, like you said, their expertise to solutions. I love that approach. What does it look like to bring them into this decision-making process, and what impact have you seen so far as a result?
Yeah, so just last week, we had our graduation of the first cohort of individuals who participated in this council of experts with lived experience. They were an incredible group of individuals, all with different backgrounds and different stories about why they were food insecure, all stories that any one of us would relate to and understand. And they did a few different things. One, we were really intentional about we want these individuals to be community leaders and advocates. And so making sure we were providing them with the tools and resources and networks to do that. So trainings on advocacy, trainings on PR, making sure that they were connecting with our board of directors or other individuals that could help, open their network even further. But then what they also did was they got involved in specific projects at our organization. So as an example, one of the experts worked with our research team, and we were doing an evaluation of one of our programs and went through the questions and said, I think you could change the way you were asking these, right? This is a little bit confusing. Another one worked with our communications team. We have been creating outreach materials to connect with families to let them know resources available. They said, you know what, this message would resonate more, right? Or in this language, it's not translating the same. You need to think differently about how you're getting this message across. So they all contributed in very different, unique, and impactful ways. And on the policy front, Project Bread is leading a Make Hunger History coalition here in Massachusetts. And we have had the council members, they have done focus groups, both with the council, but then gone back to their own communities. And then they have had seats at all the decision-making tables for that effort. So it's been an awesome first year. We've learned a lot, and we're excited to soon launch the second cohort of this council.
Well, I love that play off of Bono's Make Poverty History, Make Hunger History. I think that's a really cool, whoever came up with that idea was like, oh, I love that name. But I love how you are steering this really a large coalition now, again, for the entire state. We talk a lot about collaboration and how people can work together. And that's just so smart because the issue is so big. You already talked about it. You started with the stats in Massachusetts alone, let alone the whole country. Food insecurity is a very real issue. People continue to be surprised how big of an issue it is, but it is. It's still an issue in our communities, in our cities. And yeah, so love what you're doing on that. Okay, so with this coalition, you're bringing together anti-hunger advocates, organizations to end hunger permanently. That's really the goal. So talk more about how this coalition engages individuals with lived experience with hunger. Like, do they reach out individually? They already are part of their organizations already. How does that all work? And how did you then bring them all together with this common agreement that we can focus on this one thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just reiterating what you said, this is a systemic issue, right? When there's 20% of families with children in Massachusetts facing food insecurity, that's a systemic issue. And no organization can solve it alone. I'm so proud of the incredible work that Project Bread leads on, but we cannot solve this alone. This requires a really big tent and a lot of folks raising the issue, saying what I said at the beginning, that this is indeed solvable and convincing policymakers of that path forward. And I feel, especially in this movement, the anti-hunger movement has traditionally been top down. A lot of the solutions, if you look around, were started by very charitable individuals, right, who wanted to help out, or how do I give back, or by surplus food, right? Oh my gosh, we have a ton of surplus food. How do we get it to folks that are in need? And all, benevolent and well-intended, but what got lost in those solutions was listening to people who are experiencing food insecurity and understanding what were their specific needs and what were their specific priorities. And so throughout this process, there's been a few steps along the way. Before President Biden had his national conference on hunger, we worked with Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley and had a listening session where we focused on individuals with lived experience. And again, we lifted them up. But that day, they spoke first, right? They were ahead of elected officials, ahead of the nonprofit organizations. Their voices were lifted up as the most important in that process. And then when we as Massachusetts decided to launch this coalition, we sat around the table and said, we have to do this authentically. We know we'll probably make some mistakes and there'll be learnings, but we have to do this in a very intentional way. So what we did was, we have lots of structures. It's a huge coalition. There's over 300 involved, but really making sure individuals with lived experience are at the decision-making tables. Like there's no room where, elected officials or nonprofit CEOs are making decisions where there's not folks with lived experience who are also in that room. We're also really intentional. We know that, one or two folks do not represent the experiences of all who are facing food insecurity. So we're really intentional about making sure that we're continuously going back and getting feedback, socializing ideas, concepts, understanding what's the most immediate priority that you're facing. For example, our policy team presented all of our policy priorities to our council of experts and said, what do you think? And got reaction. And then those council members said, you know what, I'm going to actually go back and do one in my community. And I'm going to ask them as well. So it's being really intentional and making sure that everyone at the table recognizes that the voices of people with food insecurity are actually the most important ones if we really want to solve this issue, and if we are all genuinely committed to solving that issue. And that's a power imbalance from what has previously existed. That means folks giving up power to share power. But I think in Massachusetts, there really is a strong commitment to doing it that way.
Well, it's interesting to hear a bit how you organize this coalition. And I love the idea of people with lived experience are really leading the effort, speaking first, sharing from their personal experience. I think that's an excellent idea and well done. I think that's so important. Okay, so for listeners who lead their own nonprofits or are involved at a board level or development level, program director level, tell us more about the ins and outs. Like, how did you go about bringing them together? Like, did you personally or people from your team, did you contact individuals, say, hey, we're putting this coalition together? How did you recruit for it? What's the leadership look like? Because I think this may be a good model for other people to maybe do the same thing in their communities. So I'm curious how you went about doing that.
Right. Well, Project Bread, while we do lead on policy solutions, we also do a tremendous amount of direct service, right? So we are directly working with over 20,000 households a year on our food source hotline. We have counselors working directly with those individuals and are also supporting about 6,000, 7,000 patients a year through our healthcare system. So we have folks that are working closely with Project Bread and are interested in sharing their experiences, their perspectives, being a part of research, and getting really involved and engaged. So that is one really strong avenue. But we actually posted a job and said, we're posting this inaugural council of people with lived experience. We are paying them to be involved. We're also making sure that we supplement transportation costs, childcare costs, whatever they need to be there. And we got, I think, over 100 applicants for this first round. And I would have loved to have them all, but we also wanted to make sure the first year, we knew it was going to be a learning year. And we really wanted to have a smaller group who could really work closely with us and provide that feedback. But then I think what's now been a little bit just more organic is that the individuals that have really started to work with Project Bread and have felt really respected and valued are now bringing their networks along and saying, get involved with this organization. This is a really great opportunity, introducing me to, friends in their network that they think I should be listening and learning from them. So I would say now the structure is certainly in place, and that was really important. But now it's, we built it and folks are coming to us through a lot of different doors, which is awesome.
No, well done with that. That's really interesting. Well, okay, let's go then to this policy impact, the advocacy you've done, and really addressing this as a systemic issue throughout the state, really. I think a lot of people, with nonprofit leadership, they want to create lasting systemic change that really makes an impact, for generations to come, right? I think it's a hope for a lot of people. So how has Project Bread engaged with community partners as well as at the same time invest in local solutions statewide so you could really create this long-term systemic change? And what's been some of the results so far?
Yeah, I mean, we first of all, we have a tremendous policy team, and policy, I will say, is my background. And so I bring experience in it, but a passion for it as well. But you can't do it with just the policy team, right? You need to actually have people in the community who are advocates and informing the solutions. And so with School Meals for All, for example, the teachers, superintendents, school nutrition workers, parents, kids, those voices were the most powerful for legislators. I remember being on a Zoom with a bunch of eighth graders and telling them to get involved in this campaign. And they said to me, but first, we can't vote. Will they listen to us? But second, we don't know anything about politics. It seems really scary. And I don't know that how do we get involved? And I said to them, but the legislators don't know anything about middle school cafeterias. They don't sit in middle school cafeterias every day. And so it's making sure that as we bring partners into advocacy, making sure they understand you do not need to know the ins and outs of like a bill is in third reading or what's the Ways and Means Committee, because it can be daunting and overwhelming, and instead lean into your own experience and your own expertise, because that's what's most valued. Legislators would rather hear from an eighth grader telling them what the experience is like in the school cafeteria than me sharing all the data and stats about why we should do school meals for all, which they will still get anyways. But I think it's really making sure people feel empowered to recognize that their voice and their story is unique and powerful, and don't let politics or the political process become so scary that you're not able to lean in and share that perspective.
Oh, that's good. Good job. I'd love to hear some of those calls of what these students say. I bet it's quite fun. It's probably very unscripted and very,
right.
You never know what you're going to get, but I love it.
I mean, I will share, we had a great legislative visit to one of the schools in our state. And one student got up and he said to, all these elected officials from both the federal and state government, well, if you charge for meals like you do now, why aren't we doing that for buses? Right? So some kids will pay for the bus to school, some will get a reduced rate, some will get, and then he went through and listed all the other things. What about the books? What about the desks? And it was so powerful. And I could have said that, but not he was so passionate and speaking from his real experience and saying, we are stigmatizing meals by putting a price tag on them. And it's the only thing during the school day that we need to bring money for. We don't need to bring money for any other aspect of the day. So the voice of the students are just so powerful. And then teachers who were saying, students are more attentive. They're paying attention. They're learning better. School nurses saying, I'm just supporting kids with like sore throats and stomach bugs. No longer kids that are just coming to me to say I'm hungry. And that's what's happening. So it's been really powerful to listen to those folks and bring them into the legislative process.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt if you have a hungry stomach, it's really difficult to focus on your learning. And so you're providing such a huge impact. So that's, very powerful. We'll be right back. Are you looking for an easy and effective way to boost your nonprofit's donations? Look no further than DonorBox, the online fundraising platform that streamlines your fundraising efforts, maximizes donations, and simplifies giving for your supporters. With DonorBox, you can create beautiful donation forms, accept digital wallet payments, track donations, and send auto receipts. And the best part? There are no setup or monthly fees and no long-term contracts required. So what are you waiting for? Visit donorbox.org today to get started. That is donorbox.org. Hey friends, and thanks so much for listening to the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. I want to let you know that I've recently become a professional certified coach. With my nearly 30 years of nonprofit experience, I know firsthand how hard you work as a leader. I also know how important it is to have someone you can call on to get help with the barriers, the leadership challenges that you will face both professionally and personally. And I really want people to thrive, to become all they were meant to become by providing coaching and consulting services. So if coaching is something you've always been interested in, but maybe weren't quite sure what it was all about, I encourage you to reach out. You can go to my website, robharder.com, or just email me at rob@robharder.com. I would happy to provide a free sample coaching session so you can determine if coaching is for you. All right, thanks again for tuning in. Now back to the show. Okay, well, one of the other things I want to mention, as I said at the very beginning, scaling your nonprofit. You've been a part of this organization over the last 6 to 7 years, and really it's grown quite a bit, more than doubled in terms of its impact and size and budget and all of that. So maybe talk about that, because I do talk quite a bit with guests on the show to talk about how can you scale your nonprofit. It's much harder than people think for a couple of reasons. I think number one, you can't just sell more things, right? This is raising money, more grants, and then it brings in, you got to recruit the staff. And then like, so you're advocating for policies with working with people outside your organization that's takes a real skill. So a lot of things involved. So talk to me about over the last 6 to 7 years, as you've scaled, what have been some of the most important decisions you've made that really has increased, I guess, maybe the speed of your scaling there at Project Bread?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think naming it's not scaling for scaling's sake, right? And so most importantly, when I got to Project Bread, we really need to determine what was our theory of change, what was our unique value proposition, and what was our strategy. And then, that meant we had to stop doing some of the things that had done for a long time that no longer fit, that were better for another organization to lead on. But then it emerged new opportunities for us. So as one example, Project Bread, we believe in providing like case management, comprehensive, compassionate services to individuals facing food insecurity, like having a warm voice to help you navigate all of these different systems, somebody that speaks your native language. That was the first program our organization launched a long, long time ago, our food source hotline. So it's always been part of our model. And then we had started to recognize the healthcare space as well. This is a really important access point to engage people who are food insecure. So we did a pilot of what would happen if we had physicians send their patients who are food insecure to the food source hotline. So when we saw an opportunity to do this through Medicaid, which emerged in Massachusetts, we jumped in. And it was different in the sense that what a lot of the other organizations or hospitals or health systems were looking at was models around giving folks food, right? Let's give you a bag of groceries or a medically tailored meal or fruit and vegetable prescription. And we came in and said, no, we want to do a case management model. And we want to provide a whole suite of services because one bag of food is not going to help every single person. Everybody needs something different. And so our model is addressing the economic barriers patients are facing. So getting them on SNAP and WIC and providing grocery store gift cards, making sure they have a functioning kitchen. If they don't have a refrigerator, it's really hard to store and prepare healthy food at home. So buying a refrigerator. So that's just one example of a new program that we've launched in recent years that's gotten a lot of excitement and generated a lot of support for Project Bread. But in addition to that direct service work, we have been able to make the compelling case that we need to connect that direct service work to systems change. And that means having a really strong research department, community engagement department, and policy department. And so those are examples of 3 departments that are fairly new at Project Bread. But we wouldn't have universal free school meals in Massachusetts if we didn't have those departments, right? If we didn't have the research department pulling the data showing this is how many more kids are eating. This is what happens. The engagement department talking to schools and talking to students, and the policy department just up at the State House, making sure legislators were hearing about it. And so, again, I'd say it starts with making sure it's your theory of change, right? And I'll be honest, for me, scaling is never the goal. If we could do this work with 3 people, I would do it, right? I'd say, okay, we can do this more effectively and efficiently. But I believe strongly in our comprehensive approach. I believe that you have to have direct service, you have to have policy, you have to have research. And the cumulative impact of that is systems change. Yeah.
I really like what you said, that scaling should never be your goal. Your goal should be your theory of change or whatever your mission that you're driven to accomplish. And scaling is the result of hopefully a healthy, effective mission and organization. So I love that. I think you're absolutely right on. That needs to be shared more, I think. And then really like how you went into that theory of change and then how you built out from there your mission and vision and your values, et cetera. I think that I'm sure informed than decisions you made, and they're going to be much more better informed. And okay, so along the way, what would you say some of the biggest challenges that you faced that were really, really difficult to overcome in the process of scaling your organization?
Yeah, so we scaled during a pandemic. So I would say that was challenge. I mean, it afforded us new opportunities to hire folks that, previously when the job had been fully in person and we were able to move it to remote, we were able to hire folks that were working remote and could join our team. But when we all came back to start working together, I think that, we didn't know each other, right? It was literally being in an office and not recognizing like a third of your colleagues. So I think that alone, we had to be super intentional about creating an inclusive work environment and really finding opportunities for building that connection and that culture within the organization. So I think we've been successful with it, but it was so important that the team felt a part of the mission, a part of the team, really valued and really respected. I think another challenge is that when you're on that growth trajectory, people think that's just going to keep going, right? And I'll be honest, we're where we are. We might keep going, but we're going to right now just try to like fit here, right? Right? Stay at this space because we have tripled in size in a very, very quick time. And there were growing pains. And so now what we really need to be doing is really looking at like, okay, this seems to be working, but do we need to shift some roles and responsibilities? Do we need to do more of this? We piloted a lot of things during the pandemic. What worked, what didn't, and really evaluate. So it went from a period of, somebody saying, I have an idea, and me being like, let's do it, to now it's like, I have an idea. And it's like, okay, well, let's really slow down and look at the next 3 years and see where this might fit with our priorities. And I think it was going from the crisis of the pandemic, and we're still in a crisis, of course, but we can't have that sense of urgency constantly, right? We can't be sprinting on a treadmill all year round. And so I think that alone has been just a challenge too.
No, well said. Well, and along those lines, I like the idea that you've talked about people with lived experience to help you shape policy, shape your, how you provide these programs and services. I've learned when it comes to creating a good culture for organization too, you can almost put it in the terms of you should get the real lived experience of your staff, of what it's like to be part of the culture of the organization you lead. And so typically that takes the form of feedback, whether that be direct feedback, written feedback, anonymous feedback, or whatever. Talk to me about feedback in organization. Is there a best practice you have learned when it comes to collecting feedback from your staff so that you can create this healthy culture?
Right. Well, I think first of all, it's establishing trust, right? And there's no form or process that it has to be. People realize, okay, if I share feedback, it's accepted. There's no repercussions. And that takes a long time for people to get to know the team and recognize that, strategic feedback is valued and it's important and it's accepted. But then I think recognizing no matter what, some people are never going to have that sit down and give that tough feedback. So then putting processes into place. So we do an annual staff survey and folks we ask a lot of targeted questions, everything from, do you see how your role fits into the overall mission? Do you feel all of your identities are valued at Project Bread? A lot of questions specifically around equity and inclusion and diversity. But then we also have an anonymous reporting system. So it's up in our bathroom, it's up in our kitchen. If anything ever happens that somebody's like, I don't want to tell my manager, I don't want to go to HR, but I'm really upset about this, they can, call a number or go online and it's completely anonymous. And we have a system set up so that feedback is sent to, the appropriate level, right? So say it was about me, it would go to the board chair, right? And say, he would get an email from the system saying there was a concern raised. And so giving people that as an option is really important. But going back to your earlier comment, I'll give a great example. When we were launching all of this work around people with lived experience, feedback we got was maybe stop looking externally. We're here, right? There's a lot of people on the team who are working at Project Bread because we experienced food insecurity in our lives or recently. We have perspectives. And so we brought them together. We said, no one's required, but if you're somebody that's experienced food insecurity in your life and you want to connect with other employees and colleagues and also help drive the development of this process and this solution. And so that was a great example of sometimes I think organizations are looking externally and really people said, hey, I experienced it. Can I give my experience with you and inform the larger strategy for how to engage people with lived experience going forward?
Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah, like sometimes we look well beyond just our own staff that are literally right here, right in front of us, serving the mission that they've joined. Okay, good. Well, it's been a fascinating conversation. So for my listeners, I have a feeling they may want to find out a little bit more about what you do at Project Bread or get to know you and learn about this coalition. So how best can they do that?
Sure. To learn about Project Bread, go to projectbread.org. My contact information is on there. So if anyone ever wants to connect directly with me, and through that website, you can find out about our different programs, about the Make Hunger History Coalition, about the Council of Experts with Lived Experience. So projectbread.org is the place to start.
Okay. Perfect. Well, again, so glad to have you on the show, share a little bit more about your experience. But thanks for all you're doing, Erin. You're doing making a really big difference, not just in your immediate community, but the entire state of Massachusetts. So well done. And thanks for sharing those insights with us today.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on.
Hey, friends. Well, I wanted you to know that this podcast can be found on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, Google Podcasts, and wherever you listen to other podcasts. I also want to encourage you to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with others. This will actually help us get this great content out to more nonprofit leaders just like you. You can also join the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast community. Find other resources and interviews of past guests all on my website, nonprofitleadershippodcast.org. Well, thanks again for listening. And until next time, keep making your world better. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. Go to YouTube and look up Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. We'll see you there. This podcast is sponsored by DonorBox. DonorBox, helping you help others with the best donation forms in the business.